Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to this special Ask Me Anything stream. As always, I'm going to start us off with a bit of a tune to give people a chance to get in.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new gods sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to this, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age with give or wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
That was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Please go and check out his YouTube channel. He's got some really good music on there. Okay, guys, I'm feeling a bit guilty because I should have been doing a historical stream yesterday, but some bloody truck ran into a power line and I had no power for about 12 hours, so wasn't able to do it. And because the channel has been receiving a bit more financial support over the past few weeks, I was feeling a bit guilty about not doing the stream. So therefore, I thought I would do this little AMA stream to try and make up for it to some extent. We will be back next Wednesday, British time, with our normal historical stream. But just today, I thought I'd do a bit of an AMA stream. You can ask me anything. It could be history questions or political stuff if you like. And I'm pleased to say I have Mitch as a guest. How are you going, Mitch?
Same old, same old.
As always. But yeah. So anyway, yeah, so if people in the chat have got questions or anything they would like to ask either myself or Mitch about, go for it, guys, because that's what this stream is about. And if we don't get many questions, it won't go on for very long. I will just point out you can support the channel if you'd like to via Entropy. There is a link pinned at the top of the chat where you can go and do that. And you can also ask us super chat questions, which we will make sure we answer towards the end of the stream. Although I will just say that they've been coming through a bit late. So if you want to do that, you might be wise to do it sooner rather than later, shall we say. Yeah, so that's about that stuff. Also, I need to remember that Aubrey Alley, who is sometimes a guest on this stream or on my normal streams, is going to be starting her own podcast shortly, I think with you, Mitch, yeah, about the TV series and movie Twin Peaks. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Aaron Hook is also. She said Aaron Hook is interested in it, but I don't know if he's joining or what.
Yeah, no, I think she did tell me that Aaron might be a guest on that as well. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. When I have more details, I will put a link up somewhere. But I don't know what our channel is going to be called or what the series is going to be called yet. But yeah, it'll probably be interesting if you're into your reviews of TV series and so on. So anyway, yeah, did you have anything you wanted to bring up today, Mitch?
It's not really a British history one, but I don't know if you caught a wind of that new Sky series called Mussolini's Son of a Century.
I haven't. But does it look good or bad?
It's clearly got a very leftist agenda, but it is very entertaining. Like there's like it does match. I don't know, like, for example, you got this like high intensity, like I don't know what genre of music it is, but it's like high, but you know, it's like electric music, shall we say? The kind of stuff.
Okay, and is it, Mitch? Is it like a drama series?
Yeah, and it's like for example, the actor who plays Mussolini, he often breaks the fourth wall by talking, of course, to the viewer.
I might have to check that out. I'm sure it will be pretty lefty, but yeah, I might have to check that out. Apparently, Patriotic Archive, it's a drama.
Yeah, and it's it's not a documentary of any rule. It's just basically it's kind of it's pretty much like it's all from a point of view of Mussolini, so to speak. So, for example, you have the black shirts in it, and it's like they're trying to portray the black shirts as like the worst people who ever existed, and it's just like I'm looking at this. For example, you got Italo Balbo in it, who just comes off as a real Chad. For example, like there's this little bit where they go, okay, the Italian government under, I think his name was Francesco Nitti, who was a prime minister in the early 1919 or 1920, around that time. He banned, of course, the black shirts used in clubs or even walking sticks. So Balbo had the idea of using like frozen fish that when you dry it, like just fish, when it dries, it hardens, so you can actually use it as a battering stick against the socialists. And it's just like, and you just start there thinking, is this meant to make the likes of Italo Balbo look bad? Because if so, it really isn't working.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, compared to the National Socialists in Germany, for example, or indeed Stalin's communists in the Soviet Union, Mussolini's fascists were pretty mild. You know, they didn't kill tens of thousands of people or anything like that. I think certainly did
Yeah,
kill some people, but not many, really.
yeah, it's like, yeah, for example, if I say it's Italian bubbles, you know the famous castor oil thing that the fascists were doing in Italy, where let's say they would put a funnel down your gob and force you to drink a litre of castor oil, then they'll strap you to the front of of a truck or a lorry and just drive you around town. But because castor oil is a massive laxative,
Yes.
you're literally shitting it off every time. And they used to do that to any communist they caught, basically. So, for example,
Well, it's probably kinder than executing them. So
yeah, it was just a massive way humiliating because because that's the thing. Like, you have the National Socialists in Germany. You know, they do stuff like the Knights of the Long Knives, but then you get the fascists in Italy who, you know, they just come across as very lads, like very laddish sense of humor. Like you can like very military laddish sense of humor in some of the stuff they do.
And I mean, it's also true that the Mussolini had quite a few Jewish supporters.
Yeah, it's, his mistress, Margherita Sarfatti, who is a Jewish woman, she features
Yes.
prominently in that as egging him on for a lot of it.
But yeah, there were quite a few Jewish people who were full-on supporters of the fascists in Italy, and the fascists in Italy didn't have mass execution camps or anything like that. They just didn't do it. The only time the Jewish people in Italy suffered was after after Mussolini was overthrown.
Yeah, technically,
he protected them until then.
yeah, because the thing was, yeah, he passed some anti-Jewish laws back in the late 1930s, because by that time, Italy was just being really in the German orbit by that point. Anthony
Yes.
Eden didn't help by screwing over Italy over the Ethiopian War, among other stuff.
Yeah, in Abyssinia, yeah, absolutely correct. I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, I've always argued that Britain turned Italy into an enemy in the 1930s needlessly over Abyssinia. I mean, why did Britain care if Italy wanted to run Abyssinia? I mean, they probably ran it better than Haile Selassie did, you know?
Yeah, it's worth noting that before the fascist government invaded Ethiopia, the Ethiopians still had slavery as a legal institution.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I know you're quite correct about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, the other thing was, because it's like for us about Patrick Archive says about Mussolini's meetings with Hitler. Mussolini used to think like back in the around the time that 1933, 1934, when they met in Venice, for example, Mussolini was remarked as saying that he just thought that Hitler was a nutball because he kept talking about the Aryan race and all this, which of course, to an Italian mindset, you know, of course, Mussolini is a massive Roman Empire kind of bloke, whereas Hitler's talking about the Aryan race and all this, which doesn't appeal to a Mediterraneanist kind of mindset in the slightest.
No, not at all. I wish I'd have known we'd been talking about this, because then I would have asked Marcus Furious to come on, because I know he's quite into his 1920s and 30s Italian history, because he's an Italian descent chap. But I didn't know we were going to be talking about this, so it didn't occur to me. But yeah, definitely interesting. I might actually check that series out that you're talking about. And AI in the chat is saying that there's also a series on Mussolini from the 80s, where the bloke who played Patton is George C. Scott, was it? I think. Was that the guy who played Patton? Mitch, I think so.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was George C. Scott. So that's probably who he means. And apparently that is also lefty, but has some good bits.
Yeah, George C. Scott. Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to make us any sort of show, you know, in the modern era that's at all going to be pro-fascist. They're just not going to do it, you know. Even though, as I say, the Italian fascists were actually pretty mild, to be honest with you, in most respects. You know, sure, they killed people, they did, but in very small numbers. I mean, you know, entirely tiny numbers compared with Hitler or Stalin. So
yeah, one thing that's interesting is like, say, the Mussolini family, they're still pretty big in Italy. Like, for example, Alessandra Mussolini, she was like a member of a parliament like 10 years or so ago. You've got one of Mussolini's great grandchildren, who's a top football player for Lazio FC, I believe. And then
Oh,
yeah, there's no stigma at all. Like, for example, in Mussolini's hometown, Predapio, which is trying to think, it's like Romagna or somewhere like that, like north central Italy. There's a shrine there dedicated to Mussolini where hundreds of thousands of people visit, and there's no obstacle towards people celebrating Mussolini there. There's just no stick. There's not really much of a stigma about Mussolini in Italy. Like,
no, no,
for
nor
example,
should there be, really. I mean, like I said, in terms of World War II people, Mussolini was far from one of the worst. Far from. So,
yeah,
yeah.
the main problem with Mussolini was he just strapped himself to the Germans in World War II and in the late 1930s. That was his main issue. He just, he should have been like Franco and Salazar in terms of just staying neutral over the Second World War and just carried on ruling Italy.
Listen, I can't say for a fact this is true, but North Sea in the chat is saying that 27% of Jewish adults were members of the fascist party in Italy. So that's over a quarter of them. So, yeah.
That's actually probably true. I mean, I remember there was a documentary. It's like 20 years old at this point, where it was a documentary where it talks about some fascists like Italo Balbo, Roberto Farinacci, and others, and he talks about, and he does, and he's very, very anti-fascist and all. However, they make a big point that, and they actually have like this point of view character, where it's like, oh, this Jewish fella who lives in, I think it's Genoa or Milan or somewhere like that, up in northern Italy. And it's just like, oh, you ever said like this Jewish family were very patriotic, they loved the fascist party. And it was only in the late 1930s when Mussolini was kowtowing to Hitler that said Jews in Italy were starting to go off a bit. But before that point.
But also, up until 1943, when Mussolini was deposed and Italy surrendered, the Jews in Italy were protected by Mussolini and the fascists. Like none of them were sent to camps, even though some of the Germans certainly wanted them to do that, but the Italians just said no. And it was only after the Germans basically took over northern Italy that things got worse for them.
Yeah, because what was it? Yeah, because but I mean, like Mussolini will say so because when you think about it, there's in Germany there probably was a bit of a JT issue where because a lot of the Jews there were involved in socialism, whereas in Italy that wasn't the case. The Socialist Party. The funny thing was, apparently a delegation of the PSI or the Socialist Party of Italy, they went over to the whatever international it was in Moscow and they met with Lenin. And Lenin apparently just bollocks the PSI, basically going, you took out Mussolini, like the one guy who could have guaranteed a revolution in Italy. Because he was basically saying Mussolini was most, like, if Mussolini was still in the PSI in the early 1920s, you would have had a communist revolution instead of.
Oh yeah. Mussolini started off as a socialist for sure.
Yeah, and it's like I think like the Jews in Italy. I mean, that's probably kind of true because I know in Venice and Genoa, which were used traditionally merchant republics, the Jews got on all right. There was not really, and they just were massively mercantile. Whereas the Jews you get in Germany, a lot of them are called Ostjuden, so they come from the east and they're dirt poor.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, or someone said in the chat, quite a lot of German Jews were involved with Marxism and socialism and what have you. But yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and
I see Aubrey Alley's in the chat, and I will just say to her that earlier on, before you joined us, I did actually give a plug to your upcoming series on Twin Peaks.
Yeah, and what was it? Yeah. What was it about? The other thing about the fascist incident, like, one thing that will never get, I don't think this series will ever mention was so. There was I don't know if he was a fascist himself, but Mussolini appointed a guy called Cesare Mori. He's later called the Iron Prefect because he was put in charge of Sicily and he was put in charge of stamping down on the mafia. and he was very
Which
successful.
which they did very successfully, I believe, Mitch. I think they were quite
Yeah,
successful in taking away mafia power, and it's
yeah,
ironic that when the Brits and Americans invaded Italy, the Americans were actually getting US mafia guys to cooperate with them and the mafia got a big lift from the Allies invading Italy.
yeah. Because the thing was, so in when the Allies invaded Sicily, a lot of the bureaucrats there were fascists, and and of course the Allies didn't trust them. So they said, so the mafia come in and they said, okay, we'll administer the Sicily on your behalf.
Yeah,
And of course we don't really know too much about these mafia guys. We just go, okay, these guys speak a Sicilian dialect of Italian, because thing about Italian, it's kind of like similar to English where you've got massively different accents and dialects. So you can't just put a guy from Venice in charge of Sicily because the dialects are quite a bit different. And it's just Sicilians are quite insular. They
yeah.
don't like even people from Venice, let alone somewhere from ruling over them. So
Well, there's
we
quite a divide, I believe, in Italy between the south of the country and the north.
yeah, I mean, it's still around today where you got Salvini who in charge of Lega North, who he's a northern. Because the thing was, when Italy was originally unified, it was only meant to be the northerners under Camillo di Cavour. I think his name was the first prime minister. However, Garibaldi he forced the Kingdom of Sardinia Piedmont to annex southern Italy through his Red Shirt movement.
Yes,
So,
yes,
so originally
for sure.
Italy was meant to be just north. It was originally meant to be only northern Italy would be unified and southern Italy would stay the two Sicilies. But Giuseppe Garibaldi uh, um, basically screwed up that plan. Uh, yeah. So and then you got the Southerners who, yeah, I think it's one thing that I find. So I've heard, and I don't know if it's true because it's been some time since I last checked. But I've heard that apparently, let's say the Lombards. The Lombards are named after a Germanic tribe in North and who
They
invaded
were,
northern
yeah,
Italy.
they absolutely were.
Yeah, so an Italian from let's say that neck of the woods is so genetically different compared to let's say the Sicilians that it's said that English people are genetically closer to Russians than Northern Italians are to Southern Italians.
Yeah,
That,
no,
that, that,
I could absolutely believe that, Mitch. I mean, even today, if you go to northern Italy, around Milan and what have you, there's tons of blondes.
yeah.
There's there's
Whereas,
there's lots of blondes in northern Italy, whereas southern Italy was originally settled by the Greeks. And in
yeah,
fact, even relatively recently, some people still spoke Greek in southern Italy.
yeah. It's like for example, we call the country Greece because in Greece they call their own country Hellas, but we say Greece because Southern Italy used to be called Magna Graecia, which I mean
That's right.
massive like
Yeah,
big Greece, because so many
absolutely.
Greek
Yeah.
colonies. Like you've got Syracuse in Sicily, you've got Taranto or Taranto, however you pronounce it, um, as well as other areas of southern Italy that were settled massively by the Greeks. And and this is one thing that screws over Mussolini when he invades Greece, because of course there's a common Italian saying in that neck of the woods, is una faccia, una razza, or one face, one race, because of course
Hmm.
if you look at the phenotypes of Greece and southern Italy, you can't tell the difference unless they start
Yeah,
speaking their languages.
that makes sense. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Like I say, if I'd have known we were going to be talking about Italy so much, I would have tried to get Magnus Furious on. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
So I just got to remind people in the chat. This is an AMA, so if you've got questions for myself or Mitch, just put them in the chat, and we'll try our best to answer them. And they can be history, or they can be anything else. I don't really care.
where is
Mitch.
Marcus Furious? I haven't seen him for a bit, so I thought he was taking like a hiatus or something.
Yeah, I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago on X, on Twitter. But yeah, I think he is taking a bit of a hiatus at the moment.
Yeah, because usually he's
Someone's
on with them.
asking,
Oh, sorry.
someone's asking me where I'd move if I moved back to England. Well, for reasons, property reasons, probably Norfolk actually, but that's purely for property reasons. Otherwise, I really like Cornwall. So yeah, maybe there. I don't know. I'm very fond of Cornwall. I think it's a really nice part of England.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's that. It's like, I guess he's like of Sicilian stock or something, or like I think it's Southern Italian from what I remember, because that's usually where most Italian diaspora originate from, I believe. And I think and he's
Yeah,
like a farmer, isn't he? So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
assuming like Southern Italy.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about Magnus Furious?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. His family are farmers. Yeah, absolutely. His dad came to Australia after World War II, I believe.
yeah. You know the funny thing is, right? So oftentimes you get some like you get some shitlibs who insist, oh well, the Romans has like a genetic influence upon Britain. Now the Italian POWs we got from the Second World War had more of a genetic impact upon the modern British genome
Yeah,
than Romans ever did.
yeah. My father told me that in World War II, there was an enormous Italian prisoner of war camp on Peckham Rye Park in South London, and basically they were allowed out all day because they weren't a great threat to Britain, and they used to go wandering up and down Rye Lane High Street and all this kind of stuff. It's they weren't locked up for most of the time because they were no great threat.
Yeah, because it's like yeah, but that's kind of the massive mistake Mussolini made was he just got involved in the Second World War and he should have just stayed out of it like Franco and Salazar did.
Yep,
'Cause
he would have been much more sensible to have done that. That's quite true. Um, YouTube sucks. It's saying Cornwall, American here, is that close to the sea. Almost everywhere in Britain is within 100 miles or so of the sea. But yeah, Cornwall is a peninsula which goes off into the Atlantic, and so there's even more sea there than there is in most places. It's got a lot of maritime heritage, and there's still quite a lot of fishermen there and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
To answer AI, I'd say the Northern invasion of England had more of an impact. For example, it's said
Let
that
me just.
uh, it is said that so if you look up the French words that we have in English, a lot, of course, a lot of them come from the Middle Ages. Now, if let's say you or I were to read a medieval French text from let's say 1300, we'd have a better chance of reading and understanding it based off the spelling of the French words than French people living today. So it's
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, look, you're far more up on languages and stuff than I am, but yeah, that
yeah,
makes a good deal of sense.
yeah. The other thing, of course, is you know the you have a Plantagenet family. It's often because one thing to note as well, the Hundred Years' War had to happen because the French at that time they had 20 million people at the start of the Hundred Years' War. Now, when you take the population of England at the time, which was 5 million, and the Holy Roman Empire, which is claimed as a German project at the time, 11 million, the Kingdom of France has more people than England and Germany combined. But
Yep,
because of the Hundred Years' War, we prevented the French from dominating the continent for their sheer numbers at the time. So
this is true.
the Hundred Years'
Yeah,
War,
France was much the most powerful country in the medieval world, if it wanted to be, and if it was united. But of course, it wasn't, which was another thing about the Hundred Years' War. France was quite divided for most of it until the end.
yeah. What's funny is that when Richard the Lionheart took the throne, he did so not just, of course, having England, but he controlled so much French land because of his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine and whatnot, that he actually owned more land in France than the French king did at that point.
Yes,
So,
yeah, yeah, and you also had people like the Burgundians, who were like very largely independent and were often allies of the English during the 100 Years' War.
Yeah, and to get north, France was very, very regional up until the French Revolution, because up until that point, only half the population of France actually spoke the standard French. The other 50% spoke regional language like Alsatian German, Flemish, Breton,
Yeah,
Occitan, Basque.
very much so. It was the French language was only really they started to standardize it during the French Revolution, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to answer American counter revolution.
I'm going to do that in a sec, mate. But I would just say to YouTube sucks. Yes, Cornwall has loads of clips, loads of clips.
I'll just to find out, just a quick note. The thing about Cornwall was that it used to be massively used for smuggling between Brittany and
also tin mining was a big deal there at one stage, because there's loads of tin in Cornwall. So that was a big deal. And as I say, there was a lot of maritime heritage there, I mean, including smuggling. Yeah, absolutely. The American counter-revolution, do you think Imperial Federation could have saved or at least slowed down decolonization of the British Empire? Yeah, but you have to understand that my support of Imperial Federation, and indeed the idea at the time, was it was going to be the white colonies that got federated. So it would have been Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also back then South Africa as well. And yes, I think that would have had that effect. I want to do a stream on this specifically at some point on one of our history streams. But the idea behind Imperial Federation was that you would have had an imperial parliament for the old Commonwealth, the White Empire, that would have covered just defense and foreign policy, basically. All the individual nations would have done their own stuff domestically, but the idea was you would have had an imperial parliament, which would have decided matters of defense and foreign policy. That was what was behind it. But people like Winston Churchill were adamantly against it. And the first stage was going to be imperial tariff reform, which they were campaigning for in the early 1900s. But people like Churchill, who crossed the floor and joined the Liberals, defeated it, sadly, I think, myself. But yeah. I know we've done some stuff about this on some streams, Mitch, so I don't know what you think about that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Joseph Chamberlain, as I think Aaron said, he was the best. Like, he was like before Powell was probably the best prime minister we never had.
Yep, I do agree. But yeah, I mean, as I say, we at some stage we will do a stream on Imperial Federation, and I know like Horace wants to come and join one of our history streams, and I might even get him to come on for that, because I've done quite a few streams with Horace on my channel and on his about that stuff. So
yeah, I don't know if I know one thing I aim to do with it, like, I don't know, let's have history streams that come on. You get stuff like Normandy, where you get some Americans who massively tear into us, claiming that we didn't fight very well because, for example, while the Americans were storming through to Cherbourg, we were struggling with Caen.
And most of the German panzer divisions, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's like that would be one thing I'm interested in terms of, like, I don't know, just exonerating some of the stuff we get unfairly criticised for in World War II, like the North African campaign, for example.
More than three quarters of the German panzer divisions were fighting the British and Canadians. They weren't fighting the Americans. That's why the Americans could break out. But
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing was, I don't know how true this is, but apparently, like, you have the invasion of Sicily, where apparently we lagged behind compared to the Americans, and some Americans will say, "Oh, well, we performed poorly before in Sicily. This is why the Americans ended up taking the lead and feeling like they had this essential.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think that's utter nonsense, Mitch, but I'm sure you do too. This is
I
a
don't,
question
I
for
don't.
you, mate. This is a question for you because I know nothing about languages. YouTube Sucks says, what can be made of the Navajo and Cantonese Chinese language being close enough that simple communications can be made? Are all Alabathin languages similar? I don't know, Mitch. I'll pass that to you, man.
This is the first time I'm hearing. I mean, so the only thing I know about Cantonese is so you have Mandarin Chinese, which is like standard Chinese that you get in like Beijing and Shanghai and so on. I mean, you've got Cantonese now. From what little I know, it's basically about Mandarin and Cantonese. I kind of like it's similar to one another, the same language family, but it was very lopsided where someone speaking Cantonese natively can understand Mandarin speakers more easily than the other way around. It's kind of like English and Dutch. Like a Dutchman can understand an Englishman, no problem, but we have trouble understanding the Dutch unless they speak English to us. That's kind of like how close the languages are. Navajo, yeah, like Navajo, of course, is a Native American language. The Native Americans, they arrived into North America like bloody, thousands of
Via
years.
the land bridge from Siberia, I do believe.
Yeah, and that's how the funny thing about because I was reading is that Aaron Hook recommended a book about the Comanche that I read last year, and basically, so for example, you have what's called the Indo-European language families. So you have languages like Latin, English, Russian, Sanskrit, Hindi, Persian, whatnot. They're all related through what's called Proto-Indo-Europeans. Even though you think these languages are massively different, how can we be related? But actually, they are. Whereas Native Americans, you like, for example, you take a Native American on the Great Plains, let's say the Comanche, you put them in a room with, let's say, a Cherokee fella speaking their native languages, they're not at all related, even though you'd think rationally, okay, these people are very similar in terms of their phenotypes, or for argument's sake. You'd think, okay, they live on the same continent, you'd think they'd be related somewhat, and yet they're not. Even though the languages are in close proximity towards them, relatively speaking, especially when you factor Indo-European languages, massively different yet related. But like, you can't get two Native American tribes in a room together without them not understanding one another because that's just how
Yeah.
massively different the languages are. This is the first time I'm hearing that Navajo and Cantonese are somehow related because
Yeah, like I say, it's not my field at all. I know absolutely nothing about such things. I would just say to Biz5, I would not go for a pint with David Lammy, so that's an easy answer. Because I wouldn't drink with that scumbag. He's an anti-British scumbag.
I'd rather deal with David Lammy, to be honest, than deal with James O'Brien.
I wouldn't want to deal with either of them, Mitch, but the point is I would not even dream of going for a pint with David Lammy. I just wouldn't do it. I'd say no.
And James O'Brien is probably one of the worst human beings in this country by far. At least David Lammy. At least
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
At least with David Lammy, I can just mock him to his face and just give him mildly difficult questions, so I can mock him for his stupidity. At least I can do that.
Go watch David Lammy on Celebrity Mastermind. It's really worth watching. It's very fun.
Yeah.
Here's another one for you, Mitch. North Sea, Old English was interchangeable with Old Frisian. He's saying.
Yeah. One thing I found earlier this week. So you have medieval universities like Paris and Bologna. Now you'd have nations, like you'd have national differences. So you have got four university groups. You have a French nation. This included the French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Italians, because basically the French were the main Latin language people who were dominant on our continent, and the likes of the Italians, Spanish, and Portuguese being a lot more splintered. Generally follow the French line in terms of universities. Then you have the Normans, who are their own group, because the French didn't at all. Like the Normans spoke French, sure, but the Normans and French did not see eye to eye on much, which is why it's a bit iffy when you say the Normans were French. Like,
yeah, because I mean, you know, the originally they were Northmen. That's where they got the name Norseman. That's a
yeah,
Norman zone. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The first group was Picard, so this is like the Flemish, basically. They not put in with the French because basically, yeah, it's like with the Normans, very iffy, and and of course Belgium was a massively developed country at the time. Despite being a small country, it's quite well developed, especially in the Middle Ages, with Antwerp being a massive trading port and so on. And then the
yeah,
fourth group is German nation. German nation. This basically was England, Scotland, the Holy Roman Empire, and Scandinavia, and Hungary put in for good measure because basically to the French mindset, English, German, Danish, and so on. All basically the Germanic language all sounded very similar to a Frenchman's ears. So when they grouped us, we just put in with the Germans and the Scandinavians. So
yeah, that
that
makes sense.
yeah, and also it's worth bearing in mind that at that time, I think Edward Dutton said it one time in passing, but it's actually true. When we were fighting the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge, we could understand to a fair extent what the Norwegians were saying to one another because that's how because English was still quite mutually intelligible with Scandinavian languages at that point,
Mhm. Mhm.
especially the northern dialects.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense. That makes
that's
sense.
why. So Old English and Old Frisian being basically very similar to the point where in some lights you think of Frisian as basically a dialect of English, perhaps in a certain light.
Well, like I say, Mitch, you're the expert on this stuff. My knowledge of languages is very poor. Reality says, if I could only see one place in the UK, where would you tell me to visit? I don't think I could tell you just one place in the UK, Reality, because um, although the UK is not enormous, although it is, I think, the sixth largest island in the world. I think so. I think it's the sixth. But it's not an enormous place, certainly by American standards. But it's very diverse in a good way, not in terms of different races of people, but in terms of it's very different. You know, there are huge differences in Britain. So one place, I don't know about you, Mitch, but I'm not sure I could say one place. I could probably say half a dozen, but not one.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, it's like for
I mean,
example,
part of me wants to say Portsmouth because of all the naval stuff there. But on the other hand, Portsmouth is not a good example of the beauty that you can find in the British Isles. You know, so
yeah, it's like yeah. I mean, I could put arguments say Cannock Chase, for example, because it's like very much it's a very old forest to say the least. Like,
yeah. No,
yeah,
I could see that. I mean, but you know, you could also say Cornwall, as I was saying earlier. The Highlands of Scotland are absolutely gorgeous. You can look at the Lake District in the north of England. You can Oxford is worth seeing because of the ancient university and what have you. Britain, you can't say one place. You'd be hard put to even say half a dozen, you know, because there's so many and they're so different.
YouTube sucks is asking how were we able to conquer so much of the world just by being a small country with not a massive population at the time. Uh,
Navy.
I remember one time. I remember like, leading up to the Battle of Plassey, there was a fortress on the Bengal River, which was taken just by drunk Englishmen literally kicking down the door and throwing a few beer bottles at the defenders, and the defenders surrendering once. But our ships got themselves into firing position, not even having fired a shot. It's just one drunk sailor just like
Yeah,
gobbing off. And that managed to get an entire garrison of Bengalis to just surrender on the spot. So I'd say it's a matter of
yeah.
quality of fighting.
You've got to say the Royal Navy and also the extremely large British merchant fleet, um, and also the traditional Brits, which are increasingly rare these days, sadly. But the traditional Brits were pretty damn tough back in the day, it has to be said. And also, Britain was at the forefront of technology and inventions in the 18th and 19th century as well. That's how Britain was able to take over the largest empire the world has ever seen, or ever will see now.
Yeah. It's like Patrick Alcock asking what's the best county, and we go, I mean, I'm biased. I'm going to go Staffordshire because of a lot of the nature around it.
Well, it's the heart of England. I'd have to agree that Staffordshire's the heart of England because, you know, the Midlands are the heart of England. But there are loads of beautiful counties in England, but beautiful in different ways, you know.
Yeah. So, for example, you know, Yorkshiremen will often say their county is God's own land, or words along that sort.
And the
You've
Yorkshire
got-
Dales are absolutely drop dead beautiful. Yeah, I can see their point.
Yeah, it's like, for example, Cannock Chase. Because the thing was, Tolkien was deployed around around my neck of the woods during the First World War when he was, of course, doing basic training and whatnot for the army. And apparently, he said that Cannock Chase influenced Mirkwood in The Hobbit and so on. So
yeah, I can well believe that. But as I say, look, I'm an Englishman, and as far as I'm concerned, there are many places in England and also in Britain more widely, which are amongst the most beautiful places in the world. There's no doubt of that.
yeah, but the thing is, like, for this question, you're probably going to go for most rural of counties, really, because you do look at for example, let's for example, no one's going to say Merseyside would be the most beautiful part of the country because very urbanized, and also other reasons. Yeah.
Andy's saying favourite parts of Wales. My favourite part of Wales is around Brecon. I think Brecon's really lovely. That part of Wales is very pretty.
I mean, my map of Wales is going according to the old kingdoms, like Powys and Gwynedd and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It's between one of those two because very rural areas I've been through in Wales. You get some nice looking waterfalls in northern rural Wales and so on.
I was just going to say, for example, I haven't been to Anglesey, so I don't know about that place because I just haven't been there.
Yeah, I remember reading one time when Edward Longshanks conquered Wales, one of the first areas he had to earmark was Anglesey, but that was because at that time, you know, most of Wales is rugged as a bear's arse and wasn't really suitable for. So, if you wanted to invade Wales back in those times, the Middle Ages, you had to invade along the coast. You couldn't invade inland, which is one reason why before that point we Anglo-Saxons never bothered conquering Wales because the country was just so ripe for guerrilla warfare, and you just couldn't cover it. You know, you just couldn't fully conquer the land. It wasn't until Edward Longshanks, however, and Edward Longshanks, he had his trouble with them, but he was able to conquer the place mainly through superior logistics and superior organization
and putting up castles.
Yeah. So, for example, when Henry V had to, I don't know, was he Henry V at the time, or was he the Prince of? When he had to deal with Owain ap Glyndwr's uprising.
Oh yeah, he got shot in the face with an arrow, didn't he?
Yeah, Battle of Shrewsbury, that was 6 inches into his skull, I believe, and by all rights, if a surgeon didn't save him, he wouldn't have been executed. Put it that way, like it was just really a situation where it was unlikely to survive, and yet by some God-given miracle,
I think the surgeon had to design a special instrument to get it out, as I remember.
Yeah, it's like I think like I can't remember the video, but apparently Henry IV was in personal correspondence with the surgeon himself, and basically he just told him, "Look, you did what you have to. Do not feel any pressure. Do not feel any pressure in the event that you don't save my son Henry, because we know how difficult the situation is. Like, it's not every day you get like a 6-inch arrowhead lodged into your face, and then well into your cheekbone, and so on. Especially when you also got factor.
Here's a good question, Mitch. If you could spend one day with any historical figure, who would you choose?
any historical figure, or does it have to be English? Because if English, then I'll go check all Tolkien any time of the day.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd probably go Nelson or Wellington. Probably Wellington, actually. Yeah, probably Wellington.
Oh yeah, you know, I was cycling through some of the memes the other day, and I remember because I think this is actually true. So Wellington, when he invaded France in 1814 and 1815, he slept with two of Napoleon's mistresses,
He
and
did.
apparently, yep, and apparently afterwards, the mistresses said they preferred Wellington over Napoleon.
What a
So
surprise! What a surprise!
yeah,
What a
that's
surprise.
golden.
Yeah, well, Wellington was always a bit of a ladies' man. Here's another question. Was Wales never completely taken because of the bowmen and their prowess? You've got to remember, YouTube sucks, that in the 100 Years' War, a lot of Welsh longbowmen actually fought for the English against the French.
Yeah,
A lot of them.
it's worth noting. At the Battle of Falkirk, in what was it, 1296, 1297, something like that.
Sounds about right.
5,000 Welsh longbowmen were deployed. Now, bearing in mind, it was only like what the previous 20 years up to that point that the Welsh were conquered by Longshanks. 5,000 Welsh longbowmen. Yeah, there were problems with discipline at first because, of course, these Welshmen aren't exactly fond of fighting for Longshanks who conquered them. But they did their job and they served quite well at the Battle of Falkirk, especially against like these Scottish what they're called, hedgehogs or schiltrons or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The Scots
but,
used these pikemen, but basically they had
yeah,
a lot of these pikemen who had very little defense against archery.
yeah. Because the thing was, these Scottish had light cavalry and archers in between these schiltrons, but the Welsh longbows could outrange the Scottish longbows. And
Yeah.
the light cavalry that the Scottish had were easily chased off by our heavy cavalry. So these Scottish pikemen just got massacred by 5,000 Welsh longbowmen firing at almost point blank range, as it were. So even
Yeah, and
length,
this of course is how the Scots managed to win at Bannockburn, is because they took up position in front of a stream with a lot of marshy, boggy ground all over the place, which nullified the English cavalry.
yeah, it's worth noting. You could say that the Scottish taught us an important lesson that we learned damn well for the time of the 100 Years' War with battles at Crécy, Poitiers, and later on Agincourt, among other battles that aren't as well known in terms of us doing damn well with longbowmen, for example, against French heavy cavalry, and the French just never learning a lesson from that one.
Well, the only thing they did learn is they dismounted most of their troops because it's extremely hard to armor horses against arrows. So they did learn that. And of course, then eventually they got lots of handgunners and what have you, which to some degree counteracted the English longbowmen, because you couldn't teach a guy to use a crossbow or a hand cannon in a few months. Whereas to become a good longbowman, you've got to practice from the time you're a kid, basically.
Yeah. Which side would we be? Well, Huguenot would be royalist, even though he's not particularly too fond of Charles the First personally.
I'm not very fond of Charles the First, although I would prefer him to Charles the Third, I gotta say. But I would have been a royalist just because I'm a traditionalist. That's why I would have been a royalist.
I'd probably on the Roundhead side. Not much, I look at Cromwell. I was reading because Rupert Lowe, for example, he's a massive fanboy for Cromwell, and
many people I admire are Cromwell fans. I'm just not one myself, but many people I admire are. I mean, I think it's a perfectly legitimate position to take.
yeah, because it's for example, you have the English Civil War, where I think the problem you have with England at that time was basically we just had a real deficit of good leadership, which didn't have anyone who was a really good leader. I mean, the
Yeah.
closest you had was Cromwell, but Cromwell, after him, what was there? there was nothing after Cromwell, so that's why we got Charles II and the Restoration.
Someone's also asking about the Wars of the Roses, Mitch.
It depends on what time. For example, I've got my mother's family originally came from southern Wales, in not Pembrokeshire kind of way. So, in terms of my ancestry, I'd be fighting on the Tudor side at the Battle of Bosworth. Before that, however, which Edward was it? Edward the Fifth, I think it was. Of House York. I like him as a king. I don't like much like his younger brother Richard. I think Richard was a usurper. Some people.
I think there's much to be said in favour of the Plantagenets, to be honest. But yeah.
Yeah, because the problem was, Henry V died too young, and that was a terrible shame because.
Well, he would have become king of France as well, for sure. Which might have had quite a big historical influence. I mean, things might have turned out very different if that had happened. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think we would have our hands full because, for one, the Holy Roman Empire, for example, and the Spanish and the Italians, they would combining coalitions all the time to contain us as best they could. Because, imagine, like you imagine like an Anglo-French union of crowns as it were folding. It would have spooked too many people in Europe. So I don't know how feasible that would have carried on. Plus, also, the Plantagenets would have had to have faced a difficult decision. Did they pivot towards being French and base themselves in Paris? Because, of course, France is bigger, got more people, bigger economy, and so on. Or did they stay being English? Because, of course, it wasn't. Because if it wasn't for Englishmen at Battles of Agincourt, the Plantagenets wouldn't be in a position to take the French throne to begin with. So that would be the dilemma that Henry V and his successors would have had. The problem was Henry VI. He was biologically screwed because his grandmother, what was the mother's name? Basically, his mother was the daughter of a king called Charles the Mad or Louis the Mad, whichever one. Yeah. So in a way, Henry VI was screwed anyway because his grandfather on the French side was a schizophrenic. So perhaps
England finally lost Calais in the 1500s, I think.
Under Queen Mary.
In some ways that was a good thing because it made Britain turn outwards. Would you have got this vast maritime overseas empire if Britain had been deeply involved in the continent still? Maybe not. Who can tell?
Yeah. Some people would say there's a whiff of progressivism in the parliamentarians.
Yes, I agree with that.
It depends on the faction. The Levellers and the Diggers, for example, yes. But Cromwell did stand down.
They were proto-communists, basically.
Yeah. So, the Levellers, for example, were basically just egalitarian liberals early on. So, for example, you could argue that basically we live in a world that the Levellers wanted, where everything's all based on egalitarianism. Everything's built on, we must make everyone equal and treat everyone exactly the same. Even though, as we can pattern and tell for ourselves, that's bullcrap. That's one thing I would have taught in schools, to be honest. I don't know, perhaps in GCSE or A level, for argument's sake, is English Civil War. Because that's
basically English schools don't teach anything these days. I mean, you were at school much more recently than me, Mitch, and from what the younger blokes tell me, I mean, basically these days you get a little bit on the Tudors, you get a lot on the slave trade, and you get World War II, and that's it. That's the only history they teach in schools these days.
For A level, we had to study Italy, Germany, and public health, which is basically just NHS propaganda.
Oh God.
Yeah, don't like 500 years ago we didn't know how to do poo in Maloo, so we should be thankful for the NHS.
I can vaguely remember doing my O levels, and I can remember the exam, and I got an A in history, and we had questions about the Crimean War. We had questions about the Peninsular War. It wasn't the stuff they teach these days. There was nothing in my O level about World War II at all, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, it's like all the knowledge you've got about, let's say, British history in terms of the empire and so on. That's all stuff I did in my own time on my own initiative or talking to family members. I did not learn any of that in school whatsoever.
Mitch,
I
have you
don't
read?
remember.
Mitch, have you read what's it called? Albion Seed, the book.
I'm trying to look for a copy of that because apparently, like, it's too costly, and if I go try and Internet Archive, I have to borrow it every like couple of days or something on
But
there.
it's also there are audio versions on YouTube. I can tell you this. I'm not going to say where because YouTube will take it down, but there are audio versions of Albion Seed on YouTube. And it is a really good book. And Alabaster is saying in the chat, it ironically spawned the biggest split in America because of the Northern Puritans and the Southern aristocrats, which is true. Yeah. I don't know what you think about that, but I think that's pretty true.
Yeah, I've heard that from Southerners where they'll say that their side in the Civil War was basically traditional English chivalrous tradition. And I think G.K. Chesterton.
Sometimes, like Jeb Stuart's cavalry are described as cavaliers. I mean,
Yeah, because you have the Southerners. I mean, this is one thing I noticed about the Southerners, especially in America, where let's say for argument's sake, you'll get guys where it's like, oh, Michael so and so the third, and it's kind of like Americans are yearning for basically aristocratic connections that you used to have, but because of our constitution, we're not allowed to be aristocratic. So it's kind of like the Americans are yearning for European style aristocracy while being forbidden from outwardly wanting it.
all reality is making you an offer, Mitch.
Yeah, perhaps I mean, I know she's. I mean, she's helped me with like finding out bits about my ancestry for the ancestry camp. So.
Oh yeah, no, she's good on that stuff. She does know what she's talking about that stuff for sure. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lothar Sheffield is talking about his school, and like the grammar schools were a great thing in Britain when they had them. They've mostly been destroyed by Labour, as Lothar Sheffield says. But they were the way that bright working class kids could get a decent education and go to university, and you just can't do that anymore.
To answer Aubrey
largely because of Labour. Sorry, man. Sorry.
I was going to say with Aubrey, she doesn't that they don't want aristocracy. Well, that kind of flies in the face because I mean you got the Trump family, for example. Well, Trump and his lot are basically an aristocratic family unto themselves. You got Baron Trump, for example, who's like held up as like a prodigal son. Indeed. Yeah. A lot of the way a lot of American, I've noticed this more Zoomers and millennials in terms of American patriotic scene.
And look how popular the British royal family have always been in America. I mean, they've probably been more popular in America sometimes than they have been in Britain.
Yeah, and it's like, well, because you do look at you look at the way the American political system works, where you got families like the Bushes, the Clintons, the Trumps. At some point, you're going to get the Obamas being a big family.
Yeah, all it is they don't give people titles. That's the only real difference.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, basically.
And the titles in Britain these days are mostly nonsense because the vast majority of so-called lords and ladies are actually life peers now, so they're not really aristocracy at all. They were mostly given some meaningless title by Tony Blair or somebody.
Yeah, this is one thing I can find amusing about, let's say Trump floating up the idea of joining the Commonwealth, and I go, it'd be funny if, let's say, America, like if America becomes once more like what would be the let's say for argument's sake, America puts up the king as their head of state, or something. Let's say, for argument's sake, it just becomes a position where, you know, Charles III ends up bringing back America to the crown's fold. Argument's sake, wouldn't happen.
Aubrey Ali is asking when kids start school in Britain. 7, but mostly they start nursery at about 5. Is that right,
Yeah, I'm trying.
Mitch? I think, but certainly in my day, it was 7 you start primary school, and but most kids go to nursery from about 5, I suppose.
So you have reception, before you have like, yeah, it's like nursery reception. Now nursery, I'm pretty sure it's like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Then you got year 2, for example. I mean my earliest school memories I can think of were when I was in year 2, and I was like when I was like 6 or 7. So just trying to think, it'd be like 4 over here in this country when you start school. As for someone asking, Aubrey's asking, do we think that Prince Harry could ever run for political office in the US?
I can't stand Prince Harry, so I have no opinion on that because I can't stand him. I don't like him, and I hate his wife. So there you go.
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, Prince Harry's kind of a guy who, well, I don't see Prince Harry as being an actual prince because he's not Charles's son. Like he's that what's his name?
Yeah.
James Hewitt, I think the name was.
Yep, James Hewitt, the British Army officer who was having an affair with Diana, almost certainly even looks like him.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. This is one thing I hate about this country is how much of a cult there is about Princess Diana. I never understood it for the entire time I've been alive. I've never understood why. You have Charles. Yeah, he's not a saint because I mean he was cheating on Diana with what's her name, Camilla. But
yeah,
Diana,
and that's an ugly woman for God's sake, and always has been. But there we go.
yeah. And then you've got Diana, who was literally sleeping with every bloke that someone's looked her way anywhere near.
Yeah, she was a slut, mate. Yeah, she was. And why British people liked her, I do not understand. Never have understood. The stuff that happened when she died made me sick. It was completely un-British, completely un-English. It was horrible.
Yeah,
and her stupid campaigns that made the British Army give up landmines. Yeah, right. That's what a small army should do: is give up landmines. Jesus. Anyway, yeah, I'm no fan of Princess Diana. Not at all. Never was. Not even when she was around. I was never a fan.
Yeah, and the other thing was so some people were saying like about Prince Harry having red hair. I mean, the thing is that I know, like back in the Plantagenet days, red hair used to be a massive Plantagenet trait, especially with Richard Lionheart, because he had like because if, for example, apparently he was one of because Richard Lionheart, he was perhaps he was put down as like one of the most attractive men in all of Christendom at the time because he had red hair but being had blue eyes, which is one of the rarest genetic combinations you can have. So
someone's asking about the Queen, the late Queen, defending Andrew. Look, my view on Andrew is this: he fought in the Falklands War. He was a Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm anti-submarine warfare helicopter pilot, and he took his chances with all the other guys. And I have personally met sailors who served with him who said he wasn't a bad officer. So that's my opinion on Prince Andrew. I think the chick who has been accusing him of doing this, that, and the other is a fucking liar, frankly.
I don't know. I think her name's Virginia Roberts. She got into a car crash the other day with a bus, and apparently she's only got a few days to live.
Yeah, she claimed that. She claimed it, but now she's gone back on that. She's gone back on that. She's actually lost a lot of credibility over this. She also put a photo up on TikTok or somewhere where she claimed to have all these bruises, which most women who know about these things, I don't know anything about such things, but women do. Most women have said it was makeup. So,
Yeah, it's like it's kind of what word would you say? Like, 'cause the Windsors at the moment, you just look at them as a family and you go, yeah, there's nothing enthusiastic about them, but it's also it's not like they're also, but then again, there are hostile forces who will malign them. I think like Peter Hitchens, for example, he often talks about so you have Winston Churchill's funeral, which is kind of like, I don't know, as much as we hate Winston Churchill, his funeral was kind of like one of the
It
last
was
gasps.
it was a traditional funeral with the Royal Navy pulling the gun carriage, and yeah, absolutely, it was.
Yeah, whereas Diana's funeral was very much of a modern Britain, like what Tony Blair would have had.
It was
Would
appalling.
have.
It was appalling. It was appalling, and it was totally un-English, as someone said in the chat. It just was, and un-British as well. Just horrible.
Yeah, and Tony Blair, for example, you can imagine he had the time of his life at that particular moment where, he could just call Diana the people's princess and all this. So they're massive. You just have like a massive soil, whereupon it's Diana is like a progressive icon taking on like this evil British institution
Yeah.
and so on.
I look. She was eventually knocking around with an Egyptian shopkeeper. Now, okay, the shop was Harrods, but it was still an Egyptian shopkeeper, for God's sake. But, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we're just close to saying we can see the Windsor and Harry. I mean, if you look at a side profile and the hair color between Prince Harry and James Hewitt, it's kind of, yeah. You just look and you go, "There's no way that Harry is Charles's son in the slightest." I mean,
Yeah, no,
well,
look, I totally agree with that. But I mean, just to answer people in the chat more generally, I don't like Charles III at all. I had a certain residual loyalty to Her Late Majesty the Queen because when I was a young man and I joined the army, I swore an oath of loyalty to her. I never did that to Charles, and I don't regard him in the same way at all. I think Charles is basically anti-real British. I think he thinks much more of his Commonwealth brown and black subjects than he does the Anglo-Celtic people of Britain. That's my opinion, and I'm no fan of Charles at all. Don't like him.
yeah, I think
He's my king just because he's my king, but that doesn't mean I have to like him, and I don't.
yeah, and that's the thing. Well, you have the Windsors at the moment where you just look at that particular family, you just go, they're just acquiescing a lot to the decline in this country, and you go, well, where do we go from here? Because it's like you can't imagine Britain without a monarchy. But exactly.
Yeah, Patriotic Archive makes a good point. They were going to name a British nuclear submarine HMS Agincourt, which is a traditional Royal Navy name that has been around for hundreds of years now. And Charles, apparently, was the one who got it changed because he didn't want to upset the frogs. Which is the whole point of having a HMS Agincourt, is to upset the frogs. But anyway.
Yeah, you have, for example, I mean, you imagine, so Charles III, I imagine he would have a direct line of descent to the likes of, let's say, Edward III and so on.
Yeah.
So Edward III, by who I would regard as one of our greatest kings, because not just for the 100 Years' War, but also, for example, he's the one who made sure that, so because before that, our courts spoke only in French or Latin. So if you're an Englishman who didn't speak either of those languages, you had a tough time of it in dealing with the law. But Edward III changed it so that if you're an Englishman, you could, lawyers and officials and whatnot, like the legal court altogether, they spoke English as well. So there wasn't that lack of accessibility anymore. So that's why Edward III is one of the greatest. Now, apparently, I've heard somewhere along the grapevine that apparently Edward III, like most English people living today, have a genetic line of descent to Edward III. In the similar way that like 1 in 200 Asians have genetic line of descent to Genghis Khan. I don't know how true that is, but it's.
Well,
It's
I
like,
mean, you know, talking about Royal Navy ship names, there used to be a HMS Black Prince who was
oh
named
yeah,
after the Black Prince whose armor you can still go and see in Canterbury Cathedral.
yeah. That's. I hope Netflix never make a film about that guy because yeah, I mean, you, you think like there should be a film about him, but it's also well because the thing is people would misunderstand, but a lot of people, especially like modern audiences, should we say, would misunderstand why he was called the Black
Yeah,
Prince.
of course they would, mate. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
absolutely,
because
absolutely.
the thing was the guy.
Unless, of course, they wanted to portray him as a bad guy, and then they'd make him white.
Yeah, because the thing was, he was swarthy and he had dark curly hair apparently. So basically,
Yeah,
he would look like, yeah, he wouldn't look too dissimilar from, let's say, a Southern French or Spaniard, or let's say someone like my granddad, who 100% British as far as I could tell
mm.
genetically, but he just looks swarthy and with dark curly hair. You know?
People used to talk about black Welshmen back in the day, Mitch, and they didn't mean they were black. They just had black hair and dark complexion, you know, and it was quite
Yeah,
common.
yeah. So for example, Alabaster St. Black Prince of Wales of Asclepius, yeah, 16 years old of Abbas Christie. And there's a famous painting where he's mourning the death of John of Bohemia. There was a blind king who I think he was in his 70s or something in that
Yep,
particular battle. That Bohemian king was more of a danger to us, blind as he was, and he had to be tethered to two other horsemen beside him.
they
And
led
like,
him into the fight. Yep, they did.
yeah. Meanwhile, the French army in totality were just well, yeah, they weren't. We so much didn't get so much as a tickle off them compared to what the Bohemians nearly did to our flank on that particular battle.
Yep.
So that kind of tells you like that kind of tells you the valor. But also, apparently, I think there's got three arrows or something, that or like three feathers or something that Edward Black Prince added to his personal coat of arms as a means of paying respect to the dead Bohemian king for what happened to Chris. And you got to factor that Edward in that particular battle was only 16 years old.
And it's still the symbol of the Prince of Wales today is the three feathers. So yeah. Someone's asking about Henry VIII's horned helmet. Was he happy with it? Did he order it that way? I guess he probably did. It was probably a jousting helmet because when he was younger, Henry VIII was quite a fit and handsome young prince, and he was a big jouster. In fact, he got injured jousting, and it was partly what killed him in the end because it never really healed.
Yeah, and it's I don't, yeah, Henry VIII was very much of a well, what I don't know what word would come to mind when best describing it, but yeah, it was quite. It's kind of like similar to Richard Lionheart, you know, like a massive Chad in his early days, but like unlike
Yes.
Richard Lionheart, he got to just grow old, and you know he became a lot fatter, got drunk a lot. Basically, but he, you know, just age took its time with him, I suppose. Whereas Richard Lionheart, for example, in his prime, because the thing, because I've got was it channel Real Crusade History, like a very good channel if you want to
That
look
is
up
a good
the
channel. Yeah, I like that channel. It's very good.
yeah,
Real
but yeah,
Crusades History. It's a good channel.
yeah, look them up if you want to see an actual good source of every First Crusade, because I hate Kingdom of Heaven for how he portrayed Saladin as a way this massive cushy guy or whatever. When no, Saladin in real life was an absolute he was a complete bastard towards his own men because that the siege of Acre, where we took the castle and we took a lot of prisoners, Saladin didn't choose to save his men at all.
Yes.
He let his men get killed. And you got a factor that those men were some of the bravest that Saladin could field. So the fact that he didn't bother doing anything to save them actually demoralized a lot of his men. So at later points, when Saladin is taking castles of Crusaders, he can't get men to discipline. Like he can't get men to garrison the forts. from that point onward, because no
Yeah,
one would serve.
he was nowhere near the nice guy that he's made out to be in Kingdom of Heaven. He wasn't a nice guy at all. But you know,
Yeah, and the thing was, like, and whereas Richard the Lionheart, now I'm not a personal fan of Richard the Lionheart in the sense that I don't see him as an Englishman, like, because he was quoted as saying one time to one of his lieutenants, "Oh, you English are too timid," so that's why I'm not such a fan of Richard the Lionheart. However, it cannot fail to be said that Richard the Lionheart did actually care for the lives of his men. Like, if he
and
were, let's say,
he and his English soldiers, and most of his men at arms and archers, etc., were English. Defeated Saladin several times.
yeah, it's like yeah, Saladin got beaten so many times. Actually, you think to yourself, why was this guy put down as a massive hero by Ridley Scott? Because, for example, I think there was a battle called Montagissard where the leper king and Baldwin, I think his name was, of Jerusalem,
Yep.
he beat Saladin, even though he was outnumbered like 12-1, because Saladin didn't properly make sure that his raiding troops, because he sent his army to raid all over the kingdom of Jerusalem, but there was no real means of communication between these columns of raiders. So the Crusaders could just like pick off one Muslim column after another, and Saladin lost so many men, whereas the Crusaders barely got a tickle off the Muslims they attacked. And that was
Yeah.
basically because Saladin just didn't.
No argument from me. Look, Ridley Scott is a cock these days. If you watch things like Kingdom of Heaven, if you watch The Last Duel, which is a totally feminist movie, if you watch Napoleon, I've never seen it and I never will see it. I have because I've heard enough about it and watched enough little bits of it. Ridley Scott is a massive cuck these days, and that's why he makes the movies he makes.
Yeah, it's worth noting is so one thing Ridley Scott does is that he always does that strong woman routine, because basically, oh well, his mother was a strong woman as a housewife or whatever. Therefore, he has to insert the strong woman.
Well,
routine.
the Napoleon movie was really more about Josephine than it was about Napoleon. And the bits about Napoleon were mostly crap, to be honest. But, you know, whatever.
Yeah, and it puts so much on Josephine, where it's like, well, the thing with so if you look up Epic History's coverage of his campaign in Italy, Josephine was cheating on Napoleon all the bloody time.
Yes,
So
she was.
she'd be in Milan, sleeping with like pretty much half the French army officers. Meanwhile, Napoleon would be fighting off like massive Austrian armies, who are like from multiple avenues of attack.
True.
And
Yep, absolutely true.
yeah, and it's like Napoleon also cheated on her a lot. It's just one of the things where you wonder why this marriage even happened, because not a sign.
Well, I mean, don't forget, she was the mistress of another top revolutionary scumbag, and he basically just handed her over to Napoleon, and she was older than Napoleon, you know.
Yeah, it was like 6 year difference, I believe.
Yep.
So it's kind of one of those situations where Napoleon marries one. There's not really, I don't know how much a political advantage there was, because you say, for example, when he marries Marie Louise, at least she was a daughter of the Emperor of Austria.
Yeah, that was a dynastic marriage for sure. Yeah.
Whereas Josephine just came across as, oh yeah, he married her because of naive about her, to say the least. Like, she wasn't very faithful, and she didn't exactly bring loads of armies to his side. It was just a matter of Paul Barras introduced her to, and
she'd been his mistress as well before that. So, you know,
yeah,
it's like she was a bit of a slut, to be honest with you. Is the truth of it. But
yeah.
Well, not only that, Alabaster. he didn't dump her ass for he didn't simply dump Josephine's ass for an actual noblewoman and much younger, but he also got a son out of her as well. Now that didn't work out very well because he got defeated in war, but otherwise it was a very sensible move.
Yeah, I think like the son was like, yeah, he died when he was like 21, I believe, in Austria, and like, but yeah, the other thing was
but it's worth pointing out, since this is kind of a history stream, that Napoleon could have had peace in 1813 with France's natural borders, which are bigger than France's borders today. And he could have had peace then, but he just wouldn't take it.
Yeah. It's like, for example, in the Italian campaign, he often got the better situation because he was willing to cut his losses. Whereas with 1813, 1814, he just couldn't see that after Russia, a lot of his horses and a lot of his good men were killed, and he just couldn't see that. The situation was that bad. He had to come to terms, but he just refused. He just dithered rather than accept the offer. Because like Metternich didn't really want to punch down on France too hard because because France was a bulwark against other geopolitical rivals of Austria. But because the French refused to come to terms, because I think that right up to the Rhine, I believe it was, which was a damn good defensive barrier for France in case.
It was what people call France's natural borders, and France has never had those borders since. Never managed to get them.
And it's the other thing was so in a way Josephine kind of won out because her daughter Hortense, I forget which brother of Napoleon it was, I think it was Joseph or someone else. They had children, among whom including Napoleon III, who rules France from 1848 to 1871, I believe.
Yep. That's right.
That side doesn't really work out because you have Louis Napoleon, who goes off killed rather stupidly in the Zulu War. So,
and we were saying, I think it was on the last stream we did that, or maybe the one before. It might have been the stream I did with Aaron Hook on his channel about the Battle of Rorke's Drift. We were pointing out that. Although you still get some French people who say that the Brits got Louis Napoleon killed in the Zulu War, we didn't actually. The British command didn't want him there. The only reason he was there at all is because Empress Eugenie was mates with Queen Victoria, and Queen Victoria insisted that the British allow him to go out there. And then what he did once he got there was go herring off every time he saw a Zulu in the distance, trying to get some military glory. And of course, in the end, he got him killed.
Yeah, and it's because the thing was, so France nearly had a sort of counter-revolution where, because there was a guy called Boulanger in 1877, he was on the tip of taking over. And if he'd taken over, he was a lot more of an ultra-conservative monarchist type. So perhaps France would have done a complete 180 on what happens since Napoleon III was removed. But then the conservative side of French politics, they then pin their hopes on Louis Napoleon. So Louis Napoleon probably felt a bit of pressure, feeling that he had to get some military glory behind him, so then he can make a play for the French throne.
Yeah, that was undoubtedly what he wanted to do. But I'm not sure that killing one or two Zulu warriors was really going to be enough.
To be fair, like the thing about the French, it's like they're Latin people, and you got that Latin machismo that sometimes blinds them to actual common sense.
But he was definitely a problem for the Brits and the British military command in Zululand, and they didn't want him there at all, to be honest. and the other thing was he would take command of patrols, even though supposedly he had no real rank. I mean, he went to Woolwich, which is where the British used to train their artillery and engineer guys. And of course, Napoleon was an artillery officer, which is why Louis Napoleon went to Woolwich. But when he was in Zululand, he had no official rank. but he was taking command of patrols.
Yeah, and I think the guy was like 21, I believe, which
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong, but that's a bit young to take command, especially for a guy as green as he was. Because before that, he didn't have a military command.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you, mate. Alabaster is saying, didn't he, and I think he means Napoleon, bang that Polish princess? I think, yeah, there was some Polish woman Napoleon was banging. And if I remember correctly, that's another one who Wellington later on also had. But there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. I've done that. Trying to think of another
I'm not
time.
sure he would have been eligible for a BC Patriotic Archive. I'm talking about Prince Louis Napoleon. I think you can only really give that medal to British and Commonwealth people, I think.
Yeah, I imagine because it's like you have OBE, for example, which let's say someone like Piers Brosnan, being of course an Irish citizen, it's a bit of a legal quandary with him because he lives in a country that doesn't have the monarchy as a head of state.
Yeah.
Therefore, they can't you can't give someone like that an OBE. I imagine the same goes with Victoria Cross.
Yeah, I would have thought so. I mean, I know they sometimes do this with Americans, that they'll give them an honorary, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think that's the only way they can do it. I mean, the thing about Josephine marrying Napoleon, the thing about Napoleon was he actually didn't look that special. Like apparently, personal accounts from people like Sultan Massena and others, places, oh, Napoleon, if you were to look at him, he looks pretty average. You know, he's got a sallow face, he looks quite pale. Yeah. He wasn't your action hero type to look at. No, for sure.
Now, but the thing was, it was said that once he donned his hat and started commanding troops, he seemed to grow up by like 2 feet, as though he was like, in a way, but because that versus during the Italian campaign, where he was actually doing quite well fighting the Austrians. But of course, as later goes on, he gets so many Frenchmen killed that French demographics get screwed over massively because while the British and German populations massively grow because of the Industrial Revolution, the French population stagnates because so many men got killed and they weren't able to.
Very true, very true. And also Napoleon, like he started off, he really was a military genius in his younger years. But as he got older, he increasingly came to fight his battles just using mass. So he would almost invariably try and punch a hole through the center of the enemy position, you know, which, like as he did at Borodino, for example, in Russia. And you know, some of his marshals said, look, we can outflank these guys and what have you. And Napoleon said, no, we're going to go right through the middle. And if you do that, you're always going to get really heavy casualties, you know. I mean, one of the reasons why Wellington was popular in the British Army, he wasn't loved because he was quite strict in terms of discipline and stuff, but he was respected because the soldiers knew he wouldn't get them killed for nothing, you know.
Yeah, I think
he took care to have as few casualties as he could manage.
Yeah, so I think we have a Battle of Salamanca where he uses the reverse slopes to his advantage. So
in all these battles, he tries to use reverse slopes to his advantage. He's, I mean, partly, of course, he has no choice because the British Army is a long service professional army, and he doesn't have new classes of conscripts joining every year like Napoleon did. But also, Wellington never wanted to lose men for no good reason because he was a good commander, you know.
Yeah, it's like you have Battle of Salamanca and Vittoria, where so the French just You do look at these battles like Salamanca and Vittoria, where it's like Duke of Wellington does everything perfectly or close to perfect, whereas the French just massively underestimate him. Napoleon later commits this mistake at Waterloo, where he just I think like in the film Waterloo itself, like it plays into it where Napoleon's just like, oh, you're all sorely mad at him because he beat you all in Spain, and it's like, well, yeah,
Yeah, but he did beat all of them. That's a fact. And
yeah,
the French and Napoleon would say, "Oh, Wellington's a sepoy general," because he started off commanding Indian and British troops in India. But what that taught Wellington was how to fight battles when you're vastly outnumbered, and also it taught him about logistics, which were vitally important in Spain as well.
yeah. And the other thing was so for example, when Wellington was dealing with northern Spain, for example, he would have to cut his supply lines shorter by using northern Spanish ports and also using mountain passes because the Spanish guerrillas would often tell Wellington, okay, the French are using this main road, but they don't know about these gold paths or something. And that's one way that Wellington was able to outmaneuver his opponents
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time. And also, apparently, I think one thing that people don't know about Wellington is at the siege of Badajoz, he was visibly caught weeping when he saw like 3,500 of his men dead at the battlements and so on.
And also after Waterloo, the same thing happened. And
Yeah,
you would never see Napoleon in tears because of how many soldiers he lost, because Napoleon didn't really care about his troops. He pretended to, but I don't think he did, really.
no, because it's like you have so Napoleon. There's a famous line from a Waterloo film where it says Napoleon goes, "I won the Battle of Marengo." Now it wasn't him that won it. Like he was willing to admit defeat at that particular battle. It was his friend Desailly. Now Desailly had only just freshly arrived from Egypt when Napoleon abandoned his army there to die from malaria and whatnot. The thing that happened was Desailly comes back. He has to bail Napoleon out of a mess at the Battle of Marengo because Napoleon just underestimated the Austrians. And Desailly ends up dying to cover Napoleon's arse. But Napoleon would always claim credit
It's
for the
like
battle.
Mitch. It's like that. People will often talk about Wellington's infamous quote when he said, "Our men are the scum of the earth, all enlisted for drink." Yeah, and people will often quote that, but they never quote what the final bit of that quotation, which is, "But it is wonderful, the fine fellows we have made them."
Yeah, that's because the thing was he was saying yeah, it's true. Like his army would often plunder and whatnot. Once, like for example, Battle of Vittoria, you have the French wagon trains and whatnot carrying all the gold.
I don't blame them, mate. There was so much gold there. I'd have been plundering too if I'd have been a British soldier.
Yeah, but you can imagine old Nosey would have, or was also irked off because that money could have paid for all his supplies, and he was just like,
well, yeah, and also it also slowed down the pursuit of the French, so the French didn't lose as many troops as they should have. But the millions disappeared at Victoria. A lot of soldiers ended up being quite wealthy because of that plundering, and so from that point of view, I can't really blame them. But yeah, but it's also like before Waterloo, Wellington was asked if he thought he could beat Napoleon, and he was in a Belgian park, and there was a British soldier who was wandering around looking at all the statues and all the rest of it. So this dude, he says, "Duke, do you think you can beat Boney?" And Boney pointed to this British private who was wandering around looking at the statues. And he said, "It all depends on that article." He said, "Give me enough of it and I'm sure."
Yeah, so that's one thing with Battle of Waterloo was you generally have, because I think it was over Epic History TV or someone else, like History Marsh, who did a video on it, and I basically said, "Oh, the Duke of Wellington did everything right. Like he chose his battlefield. he knew when to cut tail and retreat so that and pull back so as not to get trapped by Napoleon's advance. And ultimately, because the one thing that's worth noting was even if Napoleon had won Waterloo, he was screwed anyway because there's so many people involved in the French side who were just spying for us. Because of course,
and also the Austrians and the Russians were mobilizing enormous armies to come and fight him. You know.
Yeah, and the thing was, Wellington was in regular correspondence with the French royal court in Brussels, who had spies all over, including I think the chief of police that helped Napoleon take power to begin with. Back in 1800, he was pretty much spy for the Orleans family at that point. So even if Wellington didn't win, Napoleon was screwed anyway because by that point, a lot of the guys he had to work with, aside from Imperial Guard, were green. Like, a lot of them were just teenage lads who just got drafted back when Marie Louise gave it the orders.
Much truth. Napoleon's chances of winning in the long term were almost non-existent, basically. Like, even if he'd have won at Waterloo, and he didn't even come close to winning at Waterloo, really. You know, there was never a stage when the French looked like they were going to break through Wellington's position. It was never going to happen.
Well, you kind of have that situation where I think it was that La Haye's stance had fallen and the French cannons were starting to pound, but the problem was it was too late.
It was far too late in the day, yeah. And the Prussians were on on Napoleon's flank, and Napoleon's officers didn't do their job. I mean, he sent Grouchy off with 30,000 men to push the Prussians, and he just lost contact with them totally, and then didn't march to the sound of the guns, which is what he should have done. Because it would have given Napoleon another 30,000 men, you know?
Yeah, and that's...
And then you had Ney doing idiot things like launching not one, but half a dozen gigantic cavalry charges at unbroken British infantry. And the British infantry welcomed it, because when the French cavalry were around their squares, the French artillery had to stop shooting them, because otherwise they were going to shoot their own men. So the British infantry thought, yeah, great, we'd much sooner face all these thousands of cavalry guys who can't possibly break into our squares anyway, you know?
Yeah, and it's you have, for example, what was it? You have you have Marshal Ney, who, I mean, some people reckon he had PTSD from his time in Russia.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, but to be fair, he was always known as that general who he'd be like, it's kind of like a French Edward Pakenham in a sense, like very brave, but not particularly great, probably in terms of initiative.
No, I think that's probably fair. Yeah, he was good if you gave him specific orders to do a specific job, very much like Pakenham. Pakenham, if Wellington pointed him where he had to go, was good. But when he was given his own command against the Americans, he was bloody useless, you know.
Yeah, because
someone's asking about Nathan Rothschild of Waterloo. Nathan Rothschild wasn't at Waterloo, so I don't know.
Yeah, because the thing was, the story goes that Nathan Rothschild, he knew about the Battle of Waterloo a day before everyone else in London. So he told everyone, "Oh, we lost the Battle of Waterloo." So everyone
to make money on the stock exchange. Yeah, for sure. But
yeah, apparently he did.
But he wasn't at Waterloo.
No, he just lied to everyone about it.
Harry Flashman is saying Napoleon was suffering from dysentery at Waterloo. I've heard he was suffering from piles. I've never heard he was suffering from dysentery. What I heard was he was suffering from piles, which makes it extremely, almost impossible to ride a horse when you have that sort of thing badly. But I haven't heard he was suffering from dysentery. But of course, your Frenchmen will make all sorts of excuses for Napoleon at Waterloo. But the fact is, he didn't control half the battle. He let Ney do it. and they fucked it up. So, you know, Ney saw some British transport wagons and artillery limbers withdrawing to a different position and thought the Brits were running away, which they most certainly were not. And so he launched these cavalry charges, which is what you do if the enemy's running away. But the Brits weren't running away, and they just formed square and shot the French cavalry down in droves. I can hear one of your dogs, Mitch. Which is always good. I like dogs. I like all dogs and a fair number of humans. But anyway. All right, guys, we've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. We're certainly not going to go beyond 2 hours. So if you've got any more questions, put them in now.
In terms of the French coping about Waterloo, I mean, to be fair, they do that a lot about Napoleon. But it's funny.
They sure do. They sure do.
Yeah, but the thing about Napoleon was he had a strong Corsican accent. So it's kind of like, you know, Napoleon is to France what Stalin is to Russia. Like, yeah, you know, you can say, oh, he led you to victories, but he also got a lot of your men killed.
If to YouTube sucks in the chat, he said, as an American, I would never have thought the Scottish had cavalry. I guess we're programmed by Highlander and Braveheart to think about the Highlands. Let me tell you, YouTube sucks. At the Battle of Waterloo, one of the big cavalry charges there was the Scots Greys, known as the Scots Greys because all their horses were grey horses. And one of their sergeants, Sergeant Hewitt, actually captured a French eagle, and he did so by killing about 6 Frenchmen before he could get this eagle. And he was subsequently promoted to officer, which was unusual in those days. And his son was also an officer in the Scots Greys. That's the 2nd Dragoons. And yeah, they're the only regular Scottish cavalry regiment in the British Army, or were before they were amalgamated into non-existence, like nearly all the British Army have been. But yeah, the Scots Greys were a very famous cavalry regiment. They also fought in the charge of the Heavy Brigade in the Crimea as well, where they beat the Russians.
Yes,
very, very famous regiment. And as Mitch was saying earlier, in the medieval era, the Scots had some knights, but nowhere near as many as the English did, because it was a smaller country with a smaller population. But they had quite a lot of light cavalry. That was always quite common.
Yeah, it's worth noting with the Scottish, so you have families like the Bruces, the Baliol's, among others, all of whom were of Anglo-Norman stock. Because the thing was, you had King David I, who ruled, I believe, the early 12th century. Now, he imported a lot of Norman aristocrats into the country to teach the Scottish how to do armoured cavalry warfare and so on, among other things. He gave a lot of his nobles land so that when the House of Dunkeld died off in the late 13th century, basically, you're Edward Longshanks. He's dealing out which family in Scotland gets the title of King of Scotland or whatever. He's basically just speaking in French to these people because, of course, back at that time, well, actually, no, he spoke English to them because Edward Longshanks was the first king of England since Howard Godwinson, who spoke English as his mainstay language for everyday communication. So, but of course, a lot of Scottish nobles could also speak French as well, given their Norman roots. So basically, Scotland was a lot more like England in terms of aristocracy we had than people realise. It's just because it's poorer, they don't have as much resources, they don't have as much money to pay for armoured knights in the same way that England can.
Yeah, but England was much richer than Scotland, and they had a lot more people. So, you know, that was the basic thing there. Alabaster is saying, if I remember correctly, quite a few horses in the Crimean War were bought from America. No, not really, mate. They bought mules in America for the Crimean War, certainly for transport. But most most British cavalry horses in the 19th century actually came from Australia. They were known as whalers for New South Wales. So the horses were called whalers, and it's from New South Wales, which is a bit of Australia around Sydney and what have you. But yeah, that's where most of the British cavalry horses came from. And also a lot of British cavalry horses have and still do come from Ireland as well. So that's quite common. It's ironic that if you remember in the 1970s or 80s when they blew up the the provisional IRA blew up the household cavalry guys. Sefton became a national hero, particularly with all the British kids, because he was really badly wounded, this horse, but survived. And the irony of that is that almost all the horses in the household cavalry come from Ireland. So they were blowing up Irish horses, but there we go. But yeah, no, it was mules they were mostly getting from America, Alabaster, and they were for transport use for the most part. But yeah, but most of the horses were either Australian or Irish in the 19th century British Army. David Irving apparently said Napoleon had dysentery in his biography of Theory de Morale, but Irving isn't the most reliable source. Yeah, look, Irving's an interesting historian. I've read quite a few of his books. I wouldn't say he was always entirely accurate. And he's certainly a little bit biased when he's writing about certain Second World War subjects, which is not to say he's always wrong, because he's not. But yeah. But no, I've only heard Napoleon had piles at Waterloo. I've not heard that he had dysentery at all. Never heard that. And Duke Valentino is agreeing with me, so there we go. So yeah. Seb Angler says, "God bless the brave horses." Yeah, I actually watched that movie War Horse for the second time a couple of days ago. And yeah, the only good thing about modern warfare is that horses aren't involved in it anymore, as far as I'm concerned, because horses are really basically gentle animals. You know, I'm glad we don't use them in war anymore. I mean, even in World War II, the German army had loads and loads of horses because apart from the panzer divisions, they were still mostly horse-drawn. And I remember reading stuff when I was a kid about RAF fighter pilots who just got sick of killing horses. You know, they really, even though they were in aircraft, they got sick to death of strafing columns of horses with 20mm cannons, for God's sake. I'll tell you what, Duke Valentino, I don't like races like the Grand National much. Too many horses get killed in that. I don't like that much, I've got to say I don't, because I like horses and I like riding. It's fun. Do I think Nathan Rothschild played the market in London on the day of Waterloo? I think Mitch answered this, and yeah, he did. He absolutely did. I think you answered that, didn't you, Mitch?
Yeah, that's what I've heard, but I haven't looked at that for ages. So, I mean, so I think that Petrovarkov said that apparently there's no proof of it, which I know I defer to him on it because it's not particularly something I'm that aware of.
That was what got what was his name? I'm trying to remember the name now of the Scottish captain who was a brilliant naval officer. That Jack Aubrey Thomas
Cochrane.
Thomas Cochrane, yeah, that's what got him in trouble, is that he was supposedly trying to do some sort of con on the market. But he was eventually reinstated into the Royal Navy years afterwards. But that's why he went off to South America and fought for all these South American dudes who were trying to get independence from Spain. Someone's talking about a book called Blood Meridian. Mitch, have you ever read it? I haven't.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Okay, nor have I. So, but yeah, maybe I'll have a look at it. What's it about, Alabaster? Someone saying typical Scot. That, yeah, Cochrane was such a genius naval officer. Right? If you read the Patrick O'Brien books, you know, the Aubrey Matrim books, of which there's about 20, and they're brilliant. And it's also what the movie Master and Commander is based on. Jack Aubrey is very largely based on Thomas Cochrane, very largely, not entirely, but largely. But he was a genius naval officer, and he did some wonderful naval fights where he was enormously outnumbered by the French and still won. And he did the same thing when he went to South America as well, against the Spanish. Do I think Napoleon was murdered? No, I don't. No, I've never thought Napoleon was murdered. Napoleon would have been executed after Waterloo if it wasn't for the Brits. Like the Prussians and the Russians and the Austrians wanted to kill him. And the only reason he wasn't is because the British wouldn't do that. So they sent him to St. Helena in the South Atlantic, which has a nice climate. And he wasn't in any sort of prison. He was given quite a nice big house. He had free run all over the island. He could do what he liked. He was allowed to have his own little court there and all the rest of it. The British treated him very well, considering the expense that he put Britain to in terms of blood and treasure. Britain treated him extremely well. And if it had been down, no, Hudson Lowe didn't murder him, Duke Valentino. I don't believe that for a second. But who was the British governor of St. Helena, by the way. But yeah, Napoleon was very lucky that he surrendered to a British warship, HMS Bellerophon, and that Britain sent him there, because if it had been left to any of the other major powers in Europe, like Prussia, Austria, or Russia, he would have been executed without doubt after Waterloo. They would have executed him. My thoughts on Talleyrand. Talleyrand was a very slippery character and always managed to back the winning side. And he gave Napoleon some quite good advice when he was Napoleon's minister, and Napoleon called him a shit in silk stockings. So, you know, that was Napoleon. I'm not a big fan of Napoleon, by the way, in case you haven't gathered this. I don't know what you think about that, Mitch. I mean, are you a big Napoleon fan? I've never got that impression.
No, I'm not. I think that Napoleon's kind of like Stalin in the sense that, oh yeah, he might have scored the French a little victory, but in the long term, screwed over the demographics. So he's a false hero for the French.
Yeah, I think so to a large degree. And also, he always had a Corsican accent, which is more Italian than French, by the way, because he came from Corsica. And that accent is more Italian than French, is what French people tell me.
Yeah. Tuscan dialects, I believe. So basically, you wouldn't say it's too dissimilar in his native Italian from, let's say, someone from Florence. From what I hear of it. Which, of course, you know, it's kind of like Stalin being Georgian. So you just get a situation.
Yeah, Stalin certainly wasn't a Russian, really. The Georgians are more like a kind of Latin type people from that part of the world, are they not, Mitch?
Georgians, they are. I mean, they're. I don't know what they are, but their language isn't really related to anyone else. It's not related to Russian, for example, or it's quite
Like
really weird.
I've watched videos of YouTubers who've been to Georgia, and they look more like the Italians and stuff than they do the Russians. You know?
Yeah, because it's like I've heard it's matter of, in a cultural sense, they're very much influenced by the Eastern Roman Empire and stuff, and like they're massive drinkers of wine and so on. I always heard it just basically that they're not a Latin population in that way because their language is something else. Like it's not related at all to anyone around them. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of that weird situation where it's like Georgians are very much European, but their language is so very different. I don't think it's related to any European languages that I know of. So it's kind of like it's like the Basque language in a similar way, from what I've heard, in terms of just not being related to any other language around them. It's just weird.
All right, guys, I'm going to have a quick check on entropy to see if we got any super chats, which I don't think we did because I have checked it a couple of times. Nope, we did not. Okay, we've been going 2 hours. Unless you've got anything else you want to talk about, Mitch, we'll shut it down, I think, and we'll be back, by the way, on our normal time on Saturday for our normal politics and current events stream. Someone's asking thoughts on Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III. He did quite a lot of good things for France. Modern Paris is mostly his creation. But he was damn silly getting tricked into the Franco-Prussian War, and he was tricked into it by Bismarck. So, yeah.
But basically, I've heard his domestic policy was damn good. Like, for example, a lot of the French industrialization and building of Paris, among other stuff, that happened domestically. They love Napoleon III for because, I mean, for example, a lot of the architecture. And, for example, so the French history books, they often say that basically Julius Caesar is like a hero of French history because basically what happened was he comes off, yes, he kills a lot of Gauls, but so France, in terms of their language, is basically what happens when Julius Caesar conquers a place and Latin replaces the old Gaulish Celtic language in the area as the main language. That's where the French language gets its roots. It's basically from a dialect of Latin that took over from Old Gaulish. So it's mainly because of Napoleon III that the history books start being massively Celticist and start being a lot more of a I don't know how to explain it because I was reading it in a Celtic history book, but basically, I don't know if you know that French cartoon Asterix and Obelix.
Yeah. I remember that from when I was a kid.
Yeah, basically stuff like that. Napoleon III massively funded because, of course, at that time the Germans were starting to get together, and the Germans were having their massive mythology about Battle of Teutoburg Forest and so on. Whereas Napoleon III, he wanted to counter that by saying, well, France is like the unique daughter of the Celts and the Romans, basically.
Oh, yeah, and he would have been going on about people like Vercingetorix. He would have been going on about people like Vercingetorix, etc. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Cornish in Britain or very well, yeah, there would be because so for example, the French and British customs officers, for argument's sake, let's say you were poaching, I mean not poaching, smuggling, you're going to want to speak a language that most officials don't speak. Well, most English people, of course, they don't speak Cornish, and likewise, most French people aren't going to speak much Breton. So Cornish and Breton speaking to one another in language that are pretty much intelligible to one another. Like there's not really a danger of mis. Like there might be some words here and there, like dialect or whatever, where there might be a bit, but Cornish and Breton are so close together that they have. It's kind of like Dutch and Afrikaans, I suppose.
Yeah, it's. I mean, look at Brittany got its name because when the Romans abandoned Britain, the Romano-British, some of them moved to Brittany. That's how it got its name. So that it was full of originally it was full of Romano Brits who still wanted to be in the Roman Empire, and you
Yeah,
can't
I mean,
blame them given everything else was pretty nasty. But anyway,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that can invite an entire history just onto itself is how, like, 'cause, so the thing was, in other parts of the Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes that conquered the place generally ended up getting assimilated by the people they conquered. So, for example, this is why, yeah, you got Lombardy up in northern Italy. Yeah, the name is it's still named after the Germanic tribe, but they all speak Italian or a Latin language. Or,
yeah,
France, they speak French, which is, of course, a Latin-based language, but it's named after the Germanic tribe that conquered the place. Whereas England, complete civilizational collapse, which is why English ended up dominating. And at the time, for example, that William the Conqueror comes about, there's only like 30 odd Welsh words in English. That kind of tells you that when the Anglo Saxons come over, they just don't bother trying to keep anything on. Like they don't bother maintaining anything what the Romano Britons had,
yep,
and they just build
true enough.
completely new. It's like, for example, it's like I think, like for example, the Roman ruins of London were just left there by the Anglo Saxons, and they built London like further down the river, which is
Oh
why.
yeah, I mean, look, in Alfred the Great's time, there were legends amongst the less educated Anglo-Saxons that some of these ruins were built by giants, because they were just so much more advanced than anything those guys were building at the time.
Yeah, and there's also there's a famous Anglo-Saxon poem. I haven't read it in a long time. I can barely remember it, but it's called The Ruin, where it's just this Englishman reminiscing about these Roman ruins, and he's just fantasizing to himself about what kind of people built them. Because at that
Yep.
time, there was some awareness of the Romans, because you had guys like Charlemagne on the continent who.
Oh, look, educated guys like Alfred the Great himself certainly knew what had gone on because he spoke Latin, and could read Latin. So the educated classes knew this stuff, but I'm not sure most of the peasants did.
Nah, that was generally the held up view. I mean, I know about Vikings TV series, they hold it up as, like, for example, you got one of King Egbert's bodyguards thinking that and they go, I mean, I don't know about that because you'd think, okay, if you're King's bodyguard, generally you might be a lot more well learned and probably you're more aware. Probably the same stuff as King Egbert himself, who of course spent time and also is literate and all that. So I can imagine, yeah, if you were basically anywhere near the elite sections of society in those days, you'd be well aware of the Roman Empire.
Well, yeah, I mean, look,
Existing.
Alfred the Great had been to Rome, so I mean, I'm sure he did. And there were still many ruins around Rome built from the Roman Empire when he went there. Duke Valentino, what are your thoughts on the TV show The Last Kingdom? My thoughts on that are the first 2 or possibly 3 seasons of it aren't terrible. Then it went totally feminist and bullshit. But the last movie they made, called Seven Kings Must Die, is not so bad and actually has a pretty well done reconstruction of a real battle, which is most unusual in modern TV. So that's my thoughts on that. I don't know about you. Have you seen The Last Kingdom, Mitch?
Yeah, I've only watched the first 3 seasons. I haven't watched the fourth. So,
Same. I stopped watching it because it just went so feminist. But the last movie they made, which is called Seven Kings Must Die, actually has a pretty well done battle in it. The thing that really annoyed me about that show, mostly, was the fact they give the Anglo-Saxons these little square Romanesque type shields, when in fact, of course, the Anglo-Saxons used round shields pretty much the same as the Viking ones. That was the truth of it. Duke Valentino also asked if we've seen the Fall of Civilization podcast about Roman Britain. Yes, I have, and it was quite good. Have you seen that, Mitch?
Not from memory. I've probably listened to it a long time ago, but I can barely remember.
It's not bad, and I listened to it a long time ago too because it was the first one he did, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
I know I hate the Vikings TV show. I hate it because of all the Shield Maiden bullshit in it. Shield Maidens are a Viking myth. They are not something that was in real life. It was crap.
Yeah, I also
hated all the biker style get-ups that they were always wearing. Horrible.
Yeah, it's the same happening with Christopher Nolan's Odyssey film. Basically, they just designed like long ships for ancient Greece, which, and then you've got like guys like Tom Holland who are basically dressed up like bikers and like really cheap looking armor, which horrible. This is like late Bronze Age era Greece, I believe, because I'm like the Iliad set like late Bronze Age, I think is like 1200 BC.
They should be chariot warriors in like really hefty bronze armor with boar tusk helmets and stuff like that. That's what they should be. But people were saying, do you think Christopher Nolan is a good director? I didn't like his Dunkirk film. I thought it was crap. There's almost nothing about the Navy in it, and it was the Navy that saved the British Army mostly. The little ships played a quite important part, the little boats, in taking soldiers from the beach out to destroyers and stuff. But it was basically the Royal Navy that saved the British Army at Dunkirk. And they hardly get a look in on Christopher Nolan's movie. And there's also no soldiers there hardly because he won't use CGI. So I didn't like that film at all. I thought it was crap.
The problem with Christopher Nolan films is like he just doesn't do he warps time around. Whereas like he first did it in Batman Begins, where it's like it's not linear. Now you could deal with it in Batman Begins because if the story is easy to catch on, but for even just like mid films like with Inception or Tenet later on. Yeah, and
I didn't mind Inception. I thought Inception was quite good, but I didn't like the other one you mentioned much, to be honest.
Oppenheimer.
I've never managed to finish Oppenheimer. I've tried to watch it twice, and it's so boring. But maybe that's just me. I find it so boring. But then, of course, I do know the basic story of what happened. But Inception I thought was pretty good. But that's the only one of his movies I really like, to be honest.
Yeah, you have Oppenheimer where there are certain scenes where he just goes over the top. Like, for example, there's this one scene where, you got Oppenheimer and this communist floozy he's shagging. I mean, it's just like it's set in the court, and of course they're talking about this relationship he had with this communist woman who later kills herself. And it's just.
Excuse me a second, Mitch. I just need to use the bathroom. I'll be back in a tick.
Yeah, but I just thought Nolan went too over the top with certain bits of Oppenheimer. Plus, also, I don't like the one scene where you got where you got Gary Oldman playing Truman. I actually love that scene because I just thought that Oppenheimer was a whingy pussy, just going on about this bomb I designed to especially kill people has actually killed people. Oh, woe is me. I never have a guilty conscience. And it's just, I think real life, probably the scene went better, apparently, from what I've heard. So, I just look at Oppenheimer by Nolan. I'm looking at it and going, yeah. Nolan went too overboard with certain, and this is the problem with Hollywood in general, but just go too overboard with the sex scenes, which just irks me off. And the other thing is, it just goes, oh well, I don't know. Like I appreciated one scene where Oppenheimer just gets schooled by Truman because Truman just goes, "I pressed the button. I'm the one who pressed the bomb." Because of course Oppenheimer was having a massive guilty conscience moment about the bomb. Now the thing about it was, if the bomb was dropped on, let's say, a German city, Oppenheimer would not feel any guilt whatsoever because, of course, he himself was a Jew and he wouldn't have felt any guilt about killing off Germans at that time, which
Probably not.
presumably
Probably not.
now, but because it happened upon a target he did not originally intend, i.e., the Japanese, against whom he had no bad blood, really. Oh, all of a sudden, he has his conscience. That just makes him insufferable.
So, someone's taking us right back to the start of the stream, Mitch. Duke Valentino says, have you seen Son of the Century about the rise of Mussolini? Which is what we started talking about when we started the stream, is it not?
Yeah. I like. I've only watched the first 2 episodes, but I like it.
Yeah, no, I'm going to check it out. But yeah, Duke Valentino, if you watch the start of the stream, we spent about 30 minutes talking about that and stuff around it. That's okay. It's not a problem. But yeah, we did actually talk about that at the beginning of the stream. Okay, so anything else, guys? Because if there isn't, I think we're going to close up because we've been going 2.25 hours now.
Yeah, I'll go get off and I'll go wake up early tomorrow. So
yeah, it's like gone midnight in Britain now, I presume.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for joining me, Mitch. Anything you want to plug while you're on?
I think Aubrey's doing that podcast with me over at some things. I think it's happening this Sunday because she asked me about it. Yeah. So
okay, well, if I find anything about that, I'll put a post on my YouTube channel on X or something about it. Someone, as a final question, says, was Val Kilmer a good actor? I liked him in a couple of movies he made. I thought The Salton Sea was pretty good. And I also liked him. Was it Doc Holliday he was playing in that movie?
Oh, Tombstone. I've only actually watched it. The only two films
I thought that was quite good. I thought Tombstone wasn't bad.
Yeah, it's like so you got the only 2 films I know of him I haven't actually watched is Heat. Yeah, there's a scene from that where he's reloading his it looks like an M16 from basically he reloads the gun and loads the gun that's used in like military training as a visual example. So from what I've heard, yeah.
Alabaster has also reminded me he's in Ghost in the Darkness, which is also a good movie. Yeah, so he's been in some good films. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing was yeah, I don't really know too much about Val Kilmer. I mean, the other one was Top Gun, which again I haven't watched.
Yeah, Top Gun's a very girly film in many respects. As I say, Salton Sea is a pretty good movie he was in. That's not particularly well known, but that's pretty good.
Yeah, he voiced Moses in Prince of Egypt. Huh. I remember growing up with that cartoon, so I might watch that just because I'm not really familiar with Val Kilmer all that much.
Aubrey Alley is saying he played Jim Morrison in The Doors. I don't watch musical biopics much, so
I don't even know what The Doors are.
Oh, come on, you don't know who The Doors are? They're famous 60s band, really famous. Riders of the Storm. Yeah, never mind. You're a young chap. You wouldn't know them, Mitch. You're a young fella. But yeah, no, he was all right. He was in some pretty good movies. As I say, if you're into Val Kilmer, I'd check out The Salton Sea. That's a pretty good film.
Yeah. I'll shoot off now, dude. Cheers for having me on.
Yeah, me too, mate. Me too. We are about to close. Anyway, guys, we'll be back on Saturday with Splendid Isolation. which is going to start at 9:30 British time rather than 9, purely because I don't really want to get up at 5 a.m. So it's going to start at 9:30 from now on. So
Yeah, okay.
yeah, come and join us for Splendid Isolation. I think 217, I think it is, the next one. As always, I'm going to play us out with a tune, and we've got Patriotic Archive in the chat. So this is from Patriotic Archive. He's got some good music on his channel. Go and check him out. And that was Lower Castle Yard, which is a march of the 57th Oxfordshire Light Infantry. And there we go. And that's from Patriotic Archive. Go and check his channel out, guys. It's a good channel with a lot of good music on it. Thank you to my guest, Mitch, for joining me this evening. Thanks to everyone in the chat for your excellent questions. See you on Saturday. Go well. Don't let the bastards grind you down.